Great, thank you. Thank you to everyone who made this workshop possible today. It's been very interesting so far, and thank you to the other speakers. So my name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. My date of sobriety is the 24th of July, 1993. My home group is Group 12 in San Antonio in Texas. I live in London. There's a story behind that. But I'm there most days of the week. And I've done service in AA right from the beginning, initially at group level, and since then down to intergroup, down to region for the best part of 20 years, and down to conference and board level, in that I've been on subcommittees to the board. I've not been on the General Service Board. So I'm not an authority, but I've got some experience. If that experience is helpful, that's wonderful. And if it's not helpful, don't worry about it. I don't need any poison pen letters. And it's okay for people in AA to disagree, which is really helpful. And it's okay for people in AA to change their minds. I may change my mind about anything, even later on today. So if you're having a resentment at 7 p.m. against something I said, I may already be agreeing with you by then. So I've got to cover steps 10, traditions 10, 11, and 12. The traditions were devised for two reasons, really. The first reason was to govern how groups operate internally, and secondly, to govern how groups and AA as a whole relate to the outside world, and that's a wonderful thing. The concepts, in case you're not aware, are there to govern how we as an organisation get things done. Who's responsible for what? That's what that's about. Delegation of authority and responsibility. But that's not the topic today, but it's connected. I've also discovered that the traditions contain within them a set of principles which are of immensely useful application in my everyday life, in my relationships, and so on. But I've only got half an hour or so to cover 3 whole traditions, so I'm not going to go into their application so much in a general sense in my life. I'm going to stick to their application within AA. As such. So tradition 10, what I'm going to do is read out the short form and read out the long form. So the steps have got a short form which is read out in most meetings on page 59. It's on the wall shades. The long form is the full text of what the step entails, and often it's very different. To really understand a tradition, I've got to look at the short form and the long form. There are several pertinent examples, particularly in tradition 11, which clarifies things a lot. So tradition 10, short form. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name ought never be drawn into public controversy. Long form, no AA group or member, slightly different there, should ever, in such a way as to implicate AA, express any opinion on outside controversial issues, particularly those of politics, alcohol reform, or sectarian religion. The Alcoholics Anonymous groups oppose no one. Concerning such matters, they can express no views whatsoever. So it's very interesting, this, because it's giving different instructions to different people. It talks about Alcoholics Anonymous as a fellowship. It talks about AA groups, and it talks about AA members. And tradition 10 is clearest when you're looking at the organisation as a whole, as represented by the General Service Board, which runs the charity and the offices, the General Service Office, which does the donkey's work of that, the regions and the intergroups. So it's pretty clear that none of those entities can issue statements about, I don't know, local elections or whatever, or lo local hospital services. Um, Similarly, AA groups, it's pretty clear that an AA group should not, write a letter to the council about some kind of zoning application. Where it gets tricky is as an AA member. Now, I'm an AA member, but does that mean I'm an AA member 24 hours a day in every activity that I do? Well, no, except. Um, there's a sort of sliding scale. If I've got a job in AA which involves me, for instance, as I've done in the past, going to talk to an army battalion or some army medics about what Alcoholics Anonymous is and what it isn't, I'm very clearly representing AA in that capacity. As far as they're concerned, I am AA. It's all very well saying, well, I only speak as an AA member. What I think doesn't matter. It's how I'm perceived by them. If I'm perceived by them as acting on behalf of AA, I'm acting on behalf of AA. Similarly, when I'm sharing at a meeting, I know it's very common for people to say, I share for myself, and I understand the sentiment behind that. A newcomer walks into a meeting and hears people sharing, they make their decision about what AA is based on what the people in the room are saying. It's no good giving a disclaimer saying, well, I just speak for myself. Well, you may be doing that, but what you say is not necessarily what is heard. One area I'm trained in is linguistics, and there's a very strong distinction in linguistics between the message that you're sending out and the message that's received. They even have different terms for the force of what is said. So I've got to be on best behaviour when I'm sharing in a meeting. I've got to be on best behaviour when I'm sponsoring someone as well. If I'm going to, particularly with people who are new, people who I don't know very well, people who haven't got much experience of AA, once I've got to know people, you can, as they would say in German, there's this wonderful phrase, letting the pig out. You can say all sorts of things, and it's pretty clear when you're conveying AA information and when you're just talking as a human being. But I'm very careful with new sponsees about what I say. Fellowship before and after the meeting, the same thing. When I'm at my old home group, we would go for dinner after the meeting, and I would never express a political view at fellowship after the meeting. The last thing I want is for someone to find me unapproachable because they find my political views objectionable. And then there are plenty of places in the world I can bang on about this or bang on about that. And fellowship after the meeting ain't one of them. So I keep my mouth shut. And when I've been naughty, I've apologized afterwards. The atmosphere, I've seen it happen at fellowship again and again and again. Someone brings up politics and the table splits down the middle, and the whole atmosphere changes. Don P would talk about the meeting after the meeting is where the business gets done. You have to have the formal meeting, but there's magic that happens afterwards. When I'm doing a step 9 amend, this may be the only overt contact someone has with Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, I'm super careful. Social media. I'm not perfect on Facebook. I'm better than I used to be. Again, if you're seen in your capacity as an AA member in any way at all, that my primary purpose is to be useful. I don't want anything to get in the way of that. It talks about outside issues. So what does outside mean in the phrase outside controversial issues? And a very good definition, a rule of thumb is this. anything that doesn't relate to the single primary purpose of staying sober and helping other alcoholics to achieve sobriety is an outside issue. There you go. And it, that doesn't cut down the topics. There's plenty to talk about. You know, the 12 steps and the 12 traditions and the 12 concepts provide ample room for discussion for several decades, so you're not going to run out of things to say. It mentions specifically politics, alcohol reform, and sectarian religion. And I'm going to say something a little bit controversial now, so if you don't like it, hard luck. Put cheese in your ears if you don't like controversial things. I'm not super keen on when people at meetings say I'm a recovering Catholic, or religion is for people who want to avoid hell, spirituality is for people who've been there. I've been with Catholic newcomers who feel that they're not welcome in AA because the topic of the meeting was, I'm a recovering Catholic, ha 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 ha, and everyone chimes in, well, I'm a recovering Catholic too. Um, I think it's better, it's a fun joke maybe, but does it help? Is there another way of expressing the idea without disparaging the religion? I think AA is very good at being considerate towards atheists and agnostics. Not always. There are parts of the country where you're taking your life in your hands if you say you don't believe in God in AA. But there are parts of the country where if you say you believe, I was in a meeting once where someone was talking about their relationship with the higher power, and the person behind them said, when people share about God, I want to stick pins in their eyes. If this is an expression of a view on an outside issue, you know. More controversial topics are psychotherapy, medicine, medication, other treatments for alcoholism, and what is meditation? There's a fad for a little while. I don't hear it mentioned now. Real meditation for real alcoholics, like other forms of meditation, are not real, or I don't know what the thing was, but expressing the idea that there's one way of doing things. Now the thing is, I've had an awful lot of good advice over the last 27 years on the topics of psychotherapy, medicine, medication, other treatments for alcoholism, and meditation from AA members, without which I would be dead. D-E-A-D, dead. But the way people couched it was this: this is my experience. Other people may have other experience. Do with it as you will, and consult a professional. So people didn't withhold their experience, but they didn't amplify it into being generalized statements of truth of universal application, which I must follow if we were going to stay friends. There's a big difference between a friend of mine will share one-to-one. He doesn't do it much in meetings, but he'll share one-to-one about how he had terrible problems with Valium, and until he gave up Valium, he couldn't stop drinking. He shares that, and it saved people's lives. But he doesn't generalize it to saying, you must do this, you must do that. AAs aren't sober unless they da-da-da. So there's a difference between an experience and an opinion. And the big book is full of people sharing experiences about psychotherapy, medicine, medication, other treatments for alcoholism, and meditation. But they stop short of turning them into opinions of universal application. This is it's a subtle point, but I think it's an important one. I think we do have a duty to share our experience with people if it's going, particularly if it's going to save people's lives. But it's where the line is, and that I think is learnt through experience and quiet consideration and prayer and meditation and tact and judgment in the situation in question. So what else have we got? The problem with public controversy. There's so much controversy in the world. AA has a reasonably good reputation. It's fluctuated in its public reputation over the years. Apparently, particularly in America, you see very extreme views sometimes in the press about Alcoholics Anonymous. I love the fact that when AA is disparaged somewhere, the General Service Boards approach is to maintain complete silence at the public level and occasionally to write a quiet little letter or have a word in someone's shell-like about it, but not to engage in any controversy publicly. So there's stuff in there in concept 12 which is worth looking at. There's a parallel with step 10. We've ceased fighting anything or anyone. There's a parallel with step 11. We're no longer running the show. Thy will be done. We're just sticking to what we're good at. Tradition 11, short form. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. Long form. Our relations with the general public should be characterized by personal anonymity. We think AA ought to avoid sensational advertising, by which I think it means lurid rather than wonderful. So we avoid sensational advertising. Our names and pictures as AA members ought not be broadcast, filmed, or publicly printed. Our public relations should be guided by the principle of attraction rather than promotion. There is never need to praise ourselves. We feel it better to let our friends recommend us. So the public level is anything outside the scope of AA's activities. That's pretty straightforward. Regarding the difference between attraction and promotion, I've seen the most frightful arguments in AA. There was one at Chelsea Intergroup. I shouldn't have said the Intergroup, but I've done it now. Chelsea Intergroup many years ago, where there was this terrible argument about whether it was legitimate even to have a public information officer to answer inquiries from the public about, from schools or the police or whatever about AA on the basis that it's attraction, not promotion. We're promoting by even having a public information function. That's not as silly as it might first seem. If you look up promotion in the Oxford English Dictionary, this is one of the definitions: to publicize or to advertise so as to increase sales or public awareness. Now, it's pretty clear AA does plenty to increase public awareness of Alcoholics Anonymous, particularly in London, using advertising campaigns on the London Underground and the buses. But this apparent sense of it is actually countered by what it says in the long form. And if you read Bill W.'s collected essays from the grapevine in Language of the Heart, it makes it very clear again where this tradition comes from. It's about how we communicate with the general public and the world at large, not whether we communicate with the public and with the world at large. It's about the manner in which we do it. So we avoid sensational advertising. If they meant us to avoid all advertising, they would have said we avoid advertising. The fact we avoid sensational advertising means advertising is okay. It's lurid and gratuitous and excessively provocative advertising. Public figures saying, "Look how it's transformed my life." Personal endorsements, basically vulgar advertising. I personally, I'm not so keen on the most recent ones, the most recent adverts. To me, they cross the line. That's a personal opinion. But anyway, that's the principle. That's the principle there. The catchphrase which someone came up with a few years ago, I think it was someone on the board actually, so kudos to them. We are Alcoholics Anonymous, not Alcoholics Invisible. So the point is, to attract someone, they've got to be able to see you. There's no good being completely invisible. We're not a secret society. So we do tell people we exist, we tell people what we do, and we tell people what the limits are to what we do. We provide written information on request, we have a website, we publish pamphlets, we undertake public information work, we respond to incoming requests, we outreach to professional organisations with an interest in alcoholism saying, hey, Would you like some information? Would you like us to do a talk? Mostly they politely decline, but 1 in 10 responds positively, and often you get a lot of input from that. You can have stands at conventions, you can participate in public events, as long as you're not perceived as being in cahoots. You're in this like little private AA bubble at these events. You're not doing some kind of joint venture with these. The tone of how we do this: be factual, don't praise AA, don't be sensational or extravagant in terms of what you're claiming about AA. Don't talk about other organizations except to say, Al-Anon is there for relatives and so on. NA is there, and CA and other fellowships for people with drug problems. You can mention, it's okay to mention their existence. We're not writing them out of the story entirely, but we don't recommend them. We say that they're there, go and find out about them. You can ask them questions, because people often ask you in AA about drugs, about the family, about other things, and I deflect and say just go and talk to the right people about that. Public anonymity. So I've been interviewed at sort of public level by the BBC, and I've been involved in various productions of videos and broadcasts about AA. And you're given a fake name. If they can see you, then it's pixelated, or most of your face is concealed. Basically, it's done in such a way that even people who know you might be uncertain as to whether it's you. I was speaking to someone yesterday, my friend Miranda, who said, was that you in the so and so? She said, we weren't sure. We thought it might be. And that's someone who knows me very well. That means the job has been done well. They've got an inkling, but there's no way anyone would have been able to trace me as a result of that. That's the point. The last thing you want, if someone is involved in one of those events, is for them to get drunk very publicly, and for that to be used as a pretext for saying, look, well, they're waxing lyrical about AA, and 6 months later they're found in a hotel room in Rio de Janeiro with a kilo of cocaine and a dead body in the room. So what does that say about AA? The last thing you want is for your alcohol, if you have a relapse. And there was very sad. There was a video done a while ago where the chap did actually relapse a few weeks later, and it's lucky that it wasn't. He was not identifiable. Also, it's not good for the individual, frankly. There are other things which just don't happen these days, but which they were worried about. They were worried about people misusing AA for their own purposes, about attaching AA's reputation to their own. So if they're discredited, AA would be discredited. There are some public figures who talk about the 12 steps, who talk about recovery. And this is a controversial point. People legitimately, I think, disagree on this. They're usually pretty careful not to say they're a member of this fellowship or that fellowship. There are church organizations which are not 12-step fellowships which use the 12 steps. Even if someone says, I got sober with the help of the 12 steps, it doesn't necessarily imply they've ever been to an AA meeting. There are other organizations which use the 12 steps. It's linking it to AA specifically, which is the problem there. Dr. Bob was very interesting on this. And Dr. Bob, whenever you read out what he wrote, it always sounds a bit cranky, and I quite like him for that. Bill's usually on best behavior, as Bob just didn't care, he just let it out. And this is what he said. Since our tradition of anonymity designates the exact level where the line should be held, it must be obvious to everyone who can read and understand the English language that to maintain anonymity at any other level is definitely a violation of this tradition. The AA who hides his identity from his fellow AAs by using only a given name violates the tradition just as much as the AA who permits his name to appear in the press in connection with matters pertaining to AA. So I've always been very open with people in AA about my full name and so on. It can be helpful for people to find you, and that can come in. That can come in useful. I personally respect anyone who, for professional reasons or even for other reasons, wants to conceal their surname. Um, but to me, it's this anonymity about tradition 11 applies outside in my relationships with the outside world. One point about AA and Facebook: if you've got a totally private account and only your selected friends can see it, to me it's not public domain. It's like if you had a party at your house, everyone who's invited can, see your AA book on the shelf. But I don't have a public profile, so you can't tell from the public profile that I'm in, that I'm in AA. But again, that's something that people disagree on. I know people who are much stricter about that than I am, and I respect that. There are people who are laxer than I am about that, and good luck to them. Tradition 12, short form: anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities. Long form, and finally, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the principle of anonymity has an immense spiritual significance. It reminds us that we are to place principles before personalities, that we are actually to practice a genuine humility. This is to the end that our great blessings may never spoil us, that we shall forever live in thankful contemplation of Him who presides over us all. Dear old Bill, so much for God as we understand Him. 1 minute it's God as we understand Him, the next minute he's pushing it there a little bit. But there we go. That's Bill. So now tradition 12 is a funny old tradition because all of the others are pretty clearly to do with how the group operates, or they're to do with how AA or the group or the individual relates to the outside world. Tradition 12 doesn't really tell you much about either. It gives you a general principle, or actually a set of principles, which act as more general guidance on the spirit with which these activities are undertaken. And the first one is anonymity. So there's step 11, anonymity, which is about relationships with the public. There's step 12, anonymity, which is a different matter altogether. It's about that what we convey in AA is about the content, not the who of it. So I will accept help from anyone who has a solution, not because of who they are. I will give help to anyone who needs it, not because of who they are. A good example of this is, because that's all very abstract, but a good example, when after a meeting, people go for fellowship to a restaurant. At some meetings, little cliques peel off, little fashionable cliques peel off and go to their, all the pretty people go off together, and all the sort of newcomers who are a bit rough around the edges get left out. I think it's terribly important, if you're going to go for fellowship after the meeting, you go somewhere which is cheap enough really for anyone to come along, and a place where the staff aren't going to worry if someone doesn't order any food and just has a bite of someone else's garlic bread. They're not going to slap a cover charge on them. So that anyone who wants to come can come, and everyone is invited. That's principles, not personalities. And I'm a little bit, so I've traveled a lot in AA. I've been to different places. I've talked to a lot of things, and I think AA can be in danger of idolizing certain speakers and groups, and I think it can run against tradition 12. One, and this is going to be another controversial point. One way of doing AA, which is totally legitimate, is to, you join a home group and you stay there forever and you build these immensely strong relationships and blah, blah, blah. One of the problems with that is it's very hard if you've been sober a long time not to become the resident expert. Even if you don't want people to look at you every time there's a decision or a problem, they're going to, simply by virtue of the fact that they know you very well, you've been around a long time. And there can be something unhealthy about that. If you're sober a long time and you have a home group, uh, almost inevitably, if there, especially if there aren't many old timers at that group, it starts to get referred to as so and so's group. And I've seen that again in London. Maybe it's different in different places. I've seen it again and again and again. Because the person who's sober a long time is going to have lots of sponsees, they're going to have lots of sponsees. These structures build up. I personally don't think it's super healthy. I shift things up every few years now. And I doesn't mean I ditch the old relationships, the relationships I keep, but I'm very careful I want to just be my friend Celso, my home group. He says, I just want to be a bozo on the bus. And I like that. I'm just a bozo on the bus. As soon as I don't even have to be driving the bus for there to be a problem. Even the perception that I'm driving the bus is a problem. So I get off the bus, get on another bus, go and sit somewhere towards the back, read my newspaper and get on with it. What else? I've only got a little bit more. There's a lot more that could be said. No gossip. Just cut that out. I'm very careful when I speak in a, let's say someone is doing a talk and people responding. Singling people out for praise or trips down memory lane, like when someone does a talk and everyone says, oh, I remember you helped me so much in 1987 when blah blah blah. And I've heard newcomers say, I feel like I'm in a private club here because I wasn't there for that little story, and people feel excluded. So I'm very careful about that kind of thing, not disclosing personal things at meeting level, everyone being equal, no cross-sharing, no trips down memory lane, certainly not having a go at others, and that can be done covertly as well as overtly. My sponsors taught me to say, not to contradict what people say in the meeting, but to say, to acknowledge a point and say, and in addition, dot, dot, dot. So not but and. And that's a very helpful way to expand the discussion on a topic without confronting other individuals. Not to conceive of people who are sober longer as being in some kind of different class, because they're not. There shouldn't be a hierarchy in AA. There shouldn't be a hierarchy in groups. Inevitably, there's going to be a little bit of a one. But it stems from not from people having more authority, but having more experience. And that experience may be helpful, but it's not authority. Authority is something different. So not to fawn over particular people in AA and not to demonize them either. And the last thing about decision making in group consciences or business meetings or service meetings is to keep the discussion to the merits of the idea in question. Never mention names. So don't say, I disagree with what Susan said earlier. I disagree with what Clive said earlier. I disagree with the point made that. Because it's about the content, not the person. Never personalize it. Never try to read into things or speculate or interpret or question people's motives for raising a point. To be super factual, super cool-headed, and stick to the relevant facts. And that will keep the meeting a lot shorter, let me tell you. And I suppose humility, this whole thing is about humility, which means that anything I know, I've learnt really probably from someone else. And not that they get the credit, rather me. The higher power gets the credit. And I think we just get to be channels for whatever flows through from the higher power to other people. And so my reliance is always on the higher power, not on any individual. So individuals can come and go as they please out of my life with no bitterness or attachment or rancor. Good word. My favourite word in the big book is rancor. It's not used nearly enough. I wish we had a rancor inventory rather than a resentment inventory. It'd be wonderful. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. I would say I'm going to put my number in the chat. I've got an awful lot of materials I can share on the traditions and the concepts. Some are conference approved, some are not conference approved, which is why I'm not going to share the link here. If you grab my number, particularly if you can WhatsApp me, that's helpful. I'll put my email address if you don't have WhatsApp, and then I can send you the links that way. It's very hard to type into a text. So that's all from me, and let's see if there are any questions.